And this landmark piece of legislation will continue to make a difference, not only in the South, but for all Americans and for all of us, whether we are African Americans or not. Not the minority leader, the same minority leader who said this bill eliminated the barriers to voting so that all Americans could participate in the basic opportunity each of us have. Who celebrated, quote, "We have renewed the Voting Rights Act periodically since that time, overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis year after year, because members of Congress realize that this is a piece of legislation that has worked." No more. Not in 2022. Only one Republican senator stood up to support the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When Congressman Jon Lewis and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton and hundreds of others marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, when Jon Lewis had his skull fractured on that bridge for daring to demand the right to vote for Black Americans in the American South, it was the example of their courage and their sacrifice that paved the way for passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As my colleague, my brother, Senator Reverend Warnock, has often observed, when Congressman Lewis passed, there were many in this chamber on both sides who rightly celebrated his towering achievements and his legacy. But I speak for the state of Georgia when I say, do not invoke Congressman Lewis' name to signal your virtue while you work to erode his legacy and defy his will. I've heard a lot from our Republican colleagues about the recently passed election law in the state of Georgia. Let's be very clear. There is no one in Georgia on either side of the aisle who doubts or does not understand precisely what its purpose is. Forbidding voter registration for runoff elections. Driving down the early vote period during decisive runoffs to drive up lines at majority Black precincts. As he used to say, Jon Lewis didn't give a little blood on that bridge that day so that Black Georgians would have to wait 8 times longer to vote than white Georgians. Jon Lewis didn't give a little bit of blood on that bridge that day so that state legislatures across this country could pass legislation surgically targeted to make it harder for some people to vote. All for partisan power. In the state of Georgia, where now partisan election officials can step in and throw out locally elected election boards to change who can vote and where they can vote. This in the aftermath of a well-known incident when the former President of the United States threatened Georgia's Secretary of State with criminal prosecution if he didn't, quote, find 11,000 votes that were never cast for Donald Trump. The facts of the former president's efforts to seize re-election despite his defeat are well known. He and his lieutenants mounted an unprecedented campaign to retain power based on a torrent of lies that have grievously wounded public confidence in our elections. And it was only thanks to the integrity of our laws and our courts and principled election officials and the will of Congress, the will of this Senate, Mr. President, to ensure the peaceful transition of power in the face of a violent assault on the U.S. Capitol, that this conspiracy was defeated. So now this faction seeks to dismantle precisely those bulwarks which prevented their onslaught from succeeding. The choice is ours, whether we will allow them to do so. We in the United States Congress, Madam Vice President, have the constitutional authority to make the laws with respect to the administration of federal elections. We in the United States Senate have an obligation to defend the legacy of Congressman Jon Lewis, to stand up for the sacred franchise, to secure equal access to the ballot for every single American voter so that this country can continue its journey toward full realization of our founding ideals. I yield the floor, Madam Vice President.